Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to episode number 147 of the Titanforge podcast. I'm Dratnos, joined by Terrell.
Yo, nice job getting the episode number correct.
Did you notice the brief pause as I frantically tabbed over to try and find the page that had the episode number on it?
I did, but you did it well.
Did you know that Wait, this may be the wrong episode number again. I'm pretty sure we said the wrong episode number last week than what it actually is. I think this may actually be the wrong episode number again.
Okay, well, in my defense, I'm reading off of the doc.
Okay, it is in fact episode 146, and I had the wrong episode number listed last week as well, and we read the wrong episode number last week.
Oh, this is really embarrassing for us. Oh, we're really sorry, you guys. We're gonna try and muscle through it, but you know, this is like when you die on pole, right? And all your cooldowns are gone already, and you're just like, oh, it's cursed, right? This is the bad parts already.
I forgot because I don't even know if you noticed it because I gave you the thumbnail, and then it was like I sat there and thought about it. I was like, wait, we had the wrong episode number.
All right, well, this is episode 140 something of the Titanforge podcast, and this week we are going to talk about some general tips for beginners, and then like some more advanced or intermediate tips as well, looking to get into Mythic Plus because it is a daunting thing. In particular, a lot of people come and ask us about like getting started at it, especially like trying to get started. If you're somebody who's like doing like keys below level 10, right? And you see people like, you know, the best gear comes from 15s, or you're seeing people's streams doing 25s, right? That feels like a gulf that you have to cross to get up there. And there are some tips that we have that hopefully will make it a lot easier, but of course it is a big step up in difficulty as well. So that'll be all that we'll talk about during the show today. Before we get to that, we've got some news, current events and stuff to go over. Notably, the Great Push finished up last weekend with Echo. Surprise underdog upset victory in the tournament.
Who could have possibly predicted this?
Well, it turns out just me and Doa and all the other casters did not predict it, so
Monka almost had them, you know, up until the last hour of the last day. They were like neck and neck. That was really, really fun to watch.
Monka, I thought, had a pretty bad day too, but they had the best day 3 by like a lot, and that caught them up a ton. It was very close. I mean, this is probably the most competitive TGP that we've ever seen.
Yeah, so we will have hopefully a guest next week to talk about Great Push, but that will not be our topic for this week.
They said yes, so we will tentatively have a guest.
Yeah.
Now they have to by law.
Yeah.
Well,
there's also another event this weekend featuring Echo as well, and also Liquid, Zymox's Charity Cash, which is a raid race, a Blizzard-sponsored raid race, something that hasn't happened since Siege of Orgrimmar back in patch 5.4, half of the game's lifetime ago. So
that was like Midwinter versus Blood Legion or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Here, there's the news post if you want to scroll through
let me pop that thing up here.
But yeah, so basically how it's going to work is like they're going to go through some of the bosses, and they have multiple faded affixes on each boss.
Yeah, and there's like extra curses on there. The guilds will be able to activate all 4 faded raid powers on some of the bosses as well at their discretion. And the teams that make it through the checkpoints and then, of course, finish the raid first will get more money to the charity of their choice. But both teams have like a charity they're supporting, and both charities are going to get money either way, but more to the winning one. That's how it's going to work.
I'm really interested to see how this is going to go down.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this as well. Seems like it should be
multiple affixes is going to be really tough on some bosses. Like we saw this week on a couple bosses in Sepulchre were pretty hard, even just with one on the right boss. Like the last phase of Anduin was a lot harder this week than usual.
What is Creation Spark? Is that the soaks?
Creation Spark is the soaks, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, Creation Spark is always going to be the one that's the most difficult on depending on the bosses. I could see it actually being really tough on like Stone Legion Generals. You have Reconfiguration Emitter, which is like the thing that's the interrupt one. Yeah, it's the interrupt one. But like Creation Spark is, I mean, generally going to be pretty tough on SLG.
That was the one that was active the first week of SLG. Although notably it has been nerfed somewhat since then. It does like a lot less damage if you fail to soak, and it only spawns 2 soaks instead of 3 now when you dispel. But
Oh my god, dude, Jailer with just multiple affixes on Jailer it's
Yeah,
Creation Spark.
Jailer had Spark the first time that Jailer was active
Yeah.
as well. And yeah, then it's also going to have the interrupt one. But there's not anything else to interrupt on that fight, so the interrupt thing should be pretty free.
Well, reconfig emitter is really annoying if it's far.
Yeah, but you can death grip that in.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it is. I suspect that people are going to wipe to it maybe twice across the whole. How many
I doubt
wipes
that.
do you expect to see?
I doubt there will be any wipes to reconfiguration emitter. I think that will be
Okay.
something that
Yeah,
will be
true.
pretty easily handled. I think if there's wipes to faded affixes, it'll be like. I mean, the thing is, they should have a pretty good idea of like the most treacherous combos that wiped people already, right? But
Yeah.
the ones that haven't ever shown up on a boss, maybe they'll catch guilds in a weird way. But I think it would be the soaks if anything.
Modes are just a plus, honestly. Anytime there's modes, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, nice.
The only problem with moats is if you forget to activate, and that wipes you after the 30-second cast. But assuming that doesn't happen, then should be all good.
How many wipes do you expect to see? Or, not that many, right?
Not that many, no. Yeah, I don't know how much of the we don't know all of the rules about like difficulty. There's going to be the fated curses that will be a surprise modifier of some kind, so that may cause wipes. I'm not sure. Hopefully there are a few wipes, but I don't think there'll be too many.
I was about to say something. I was about to say something else, but it's not listed.
Yeah.
I hope it's Thing from Beyond.
Yeah,
Thing from Beyond targets random players.
Oh shit!
dude, I miss Thing from Beyond so bad.
I
Yeah.
don't.
This is gonna be a cool event for sure. And of course, Tettles and myself will both be casting that, so do check it out this weekend. Right. Main topic time. Beginner tips for Mythic Plus aspirants. Those hoping to get into Mythic Plus. So we put out a big tweet. We got a lot of great replies on that tweet of tips. We aren't going to show all of them. Some of them are repetitive. Some of them we've kind of rephrased into or combined or split into multiple. A lot of them have inspired us though, so we're not going to be able to credit like all of them. We'll show a couple of them over this, and we'd like to encourage people as well. Just go check out our tweet about this episode and look through all the replies if you're curious for more tips. Another place that you can get some of the very basic stuff and some good writing about beginner tips is Raider.io. They have an M Plus 101 series that you can find under the Learn tab. This is one of the tabs that you may not have seen yet on this site, but there's actually quite a few different articles here that can be good to get through if you're somebody who likes reading, which if you're from one of the other countries than us, that might be true for you. Then
Dude,
this could be a good place to go.
You guys know how to read?
What a very broad, encompassing group of people. If you know how to read.
Yep. If you're literate, but like some people like to learn by reading, some people like to have stuff to read through, and some don't.
Yeah.
So this is a great source if you do like reading through stuff. A lot of good writing up on things.
These are like I read through this article because we were talking about talking through it. Those are like the very basic of tips. Like this is like I've never stepped foot in a dungeon. I don't know what to even kind of expect. Whatever I step into a key. That's what that 101 is. Obviously, there's different learn segments depending on your skill as well. But yeah, I mean that article, it was very good for if you have never done a dungeon. You're like, what do I expect?
Yeah,
that's what you read.
It kind of like starts from like first principles, right? Building up like
Yes.
There's one of the first sections is in this article is meaningful damage, right? The concept of like how good is AoE versus single target in dungeons, right? And that's something we talk about a lot, but like even just defining that and talking about it is something that can be good to think about.
We talk about it as like a nuanced point of like when am I prioritizing AoE versus single target, not in regards to like how valuable is it
right.
to AoE?
Just like defining the ideas. Yeah. So a good place to get started. We also, so first kind of thing that I think catches people out when they're trying to do Mythic Plus is getting into a group of 5 players that will do a Mythic Plus dungeon. In fact, for many players, all the way up to many years of doing Mythic Plus, this continues to be the hardest part of Mythic Plus, right? Is forming the group. So we wanted to start by going into some tips surrounding this. And I guess the first question is kind of figuring out whether, like, what kind of group you're looking to join, right? Like, how hard you're trying to go, whether you are looking to execute some kind of meta strategy, play with certain specs, play as a certain spec, versus are you just looking to, join the first group that'll take you, accept the first people that apply to your keystone, right? Those can be very different choices. And in particular, if you are being very selective and applying to just the like groups that are overscoring the dungeons and that have like good specs and stuff, and you are like under geared and not one of the meta specs, like you're not going to get accepted to any group ever, right? And that's a really frustrating pattern.
Like, what general advice would you have about playing meta for like beginners? Because I see a lot of different opinions on this, as like what you should do about just meta specs and meta classes in general whenever you're starting out.
Well, I mean, I think you should play a meta spec if you're starting out, especially if you want to be getting into Mythic Plus and getting into groups. That makes it like twice as easy to get into groups. But it's certainly not required. Like if you have good networking skills and you add the people you play with and you work your way up, you can do it as a non-meta spec. It's just going to be a little bit easier as a meta spec.
Yeah, it is. It's a hard mode that you're applying to your like Mythic Plus search, which for some people it's very worth, right? Like for some people, playing the spec they like is prio one, right? And most of the rest of the tips here will continue to work for you, but it'll be more important, especially like you said, networking, like grabbing on to the people that are willing to play with you and holding on for dear life if you're playing an off meta spec. It does depend a little bit on the season. This will be something that if you're a new player, listening to this in the future, you may not, depending on the season, it may be easier or harder to get into things as a non-meta spec. Right now, for instance, I would say like, actually Blood DK is fairly hard. Like Blood DK is, the community perception at least is way higher than like all the other tank specs, for instance. So like if you're trying to tank keys, it's probably like a 200% multiplier on how many invites you're going to get. Something like that.
There's also a distinct disparity between like getting into groups with your friends and LFG. So, I mean, what Dradnus is referring to right there is about LFG and about community perception and stuff like that. Whereas, like, playing with friends, it matters a lot less, right? Because your expectations are just different because you're grouped up with people that you want to enjoy playing with first and foremost. And so, but like, I still do think that one of, if not the most important thing about doing dungeons is getting into a group somehow. Like, it doesn't matter how. Like, it can be through having that network that Troll was alluding to of built-up friends or like a community. Or it can be through LFG, which I mean is I think the most popular thing. But I will admit, going through LFG is playing it on hard mode, especially early on in seasons. Just like really early on in seasons, going through LFG is really hard.
Yeah, I think the guild path as well is a good one for Mythic Plus. Like often, guilds, even just like a heroic clearing guild, if you're in one of those that's fairly active, you'll be able to find Mythic Plus groups that'll often be like much more friendly and much more willing to take on somebody who's maybe learning and who's on kind of whatever character, whatever item level. It'll be a much easier time than getting in through LFG if you can find a guild that is somewhat active and has some M+ runners. That often can be a really good stepping stone in.
Okay, so how do you feel about like other roles? So like obviously tanks, there's not that many just tank classes in general. Is playing like do you really think that playing meta is like something that's more important for them because there are less classes?
I mean, it's just the trickle down effect. Even though you really don't need to be a meta tank until like 27, 28 plus, for the average group. I was in Group Finder today and they were like plus 20s, plus 21s, Blood DK only in their title, so it just opens up options more if you play the meta. Whereas even though you don't have to, it's a good place to start if you're trying to learn the role or learn Mythic Plus in general. But also, as a tank player, I would just list your own key, especially as a tank player, because you have the control over the group, and you can even start at a +2 and just work your way up. It doesn't matter what kind of player you get until you get to like, +10, +15. Then you kind of want some smarter players as you get higher. But just getting your own key up and then listing your own group is the best way to go by far.
Listing your own key is by far the best advice that I can give to somebody, especially if you're like not at like the very first couple of weeks of the season, but even if you are, it's still really good. I was gearing this really rat warlock of mine the other day, and we'll say it was 270 item level. There are people who are well over 300 item level, and I had a 15, and I was like, oh, this is nice. And so I listed in Group Finder, and you know what I do? I wait until people that are very overqualified apply for my key, who are just trying to get a weekly done or trying to get gear out of the dungeon, and I accept them, and I'm like, don't mind if I do. And then you know what? They also can trade me loot because my rat character is trying to get geared. And it's like a good way of, okay, so first off, I'm playing with people who should, in theory, be better than me. So I'm shooting strategies that may overperform my skill level. In addition to that, I'm able to just get into groups more frequently, build score, and just kind of continue to see the dungeons, get familiar with the dungeons and whatnot.
That's also good for a bunch more reasons. Like when you play with more experienced players than yourself, you might pick up a few tricks too.
Yeah.
Like Tettles obviously has done this forever, but if you're the average player and you wait for some experienced Mythic Raiders to hop into your 15 for their weekly, they'll probably do something pretty cool if you notice it. Like I had a Rep Pally earlier in one of my anonymous plugs, and he was doing some really good stuff. Like he was sacking me as the tank. He was bopping players fixated by the third boss in Iron Docks. There was all kinds of good stuff. Like I would take a Rep Pally player up to like a plus 27 if they're that kind of player rather than a meta player any day.
Yeah. So if you're at a point of like choosing which character you're going to play, especially as a new player, one of the other benefits of picking a meta spec is that you get to watch people. Like there's a lot of known good stuff about it, right? Like knowing all the stuff you can bop or sack as a Rep Paladin, knowing all the stuff that like where Rep Pallies can cool down or those kinds of things is a lot less known than like, what does Hunter feign this season, right? Like what does, how do all the, what do I turtle, right? Those sorts of questions are easier for you to get from others, right? Easier to even have people in your pug tell you, right? Like they can tell you like feign this, or like run through and do and feign, camo here or whatever, like those kinds of things, binding shot this. You can pick up more easily on a meta spec in any given season than a non-meta spec. So that is one other advantage of choosing one of them.
Regardless of what you play, though, I would recommend like being able to do some research outside of just doing the dungeons themselves. Whether that be, I think that like just Twitch streaming and then going into people's chats and asking questions is one of the easiest ways that you can do that. Additionally, class discords, especially if you're like really new, can be also a pretty prominent resource, because in a lot of class discords they're just like Mythic Raiders, and if you're still trying to get into 15s or get KSM and stuff like that, they can actually give you a lot of valuable advice. Just having like cutting edge raiders on how functionality works of like specific utility in dungeons and whatnot.
Yeah, and you can also do this experimentally rather than like if you're not somebody who wants to do research, literally just like anytime you're targeted by anything, try feigning it. Anytime you're targeted by anything, try using a certain ability against it, see what happens, right? See
what works.
Is this thing? What happens if I stun this? Does it recast? Right? Like asking those questions and then trying to like actually investigate them from pull to pull can be a good way to. Yeah, exactly. Like what happens if I do this is a great thing to do, especially if you're at a key level where you're like safe on a pull, right? And it's like, okay, we're timing this key. Let me try feigning this, right? Let me try.
Yeah, sure.
Stunning this.
That's some good advice, especially defensives. Like feign is a defensive in this case, but even as tank players, you should really test your kit out on like basically any kind of damage you're about to take. Like if you have some mechanic you're ever worried about, you should test what Demo Shout does to it the next time it hits you, or Demo Shout plus Spell Reflect at the same time, taking like a magic dot. Or like the perfect example of that is Shared Suffering and Lower, which I'll talk about later, but you should like test all kinds of different combos of defensives and how much you get hit for on any given key level and all that.
I unironically try to solar beam mobs that are non-interruptible, because there are times where you can silence through like and make a cast get delayed. Like the biggest example I have is there was a rallying cry effect in one of the Black or Cold mobs. And it was like a non-interruptible cast,
That's
but you could solar beam it to delay its cast longer.
Yeah. Now that's obviously like, as a new player, you're never going to even think of that, right? Like,
yeah.
Or have any idea to like even know any of that's going on. But a general like curiosity about the dungeons, I think, is the kind of thing that if you can foster that in yourself and just be trying things and seeing what happens, or like if somebody else does something, it's trying to figure out why they did it. Because oftentimes like you'll see a mob gets kidneyed and you're like, oh, why did they kidney that mob, right? And then it's like, oh, well, it's not casting fish stick again.
really make sure that you're getting into groups and getting like runs under your belt, though, is like the best thing that I can advise you to do. Just make sure that you're getting more and more runs.
Right. So again, listing your own key, adding. So the other thing, adding people at the end of the dungeon, adding anybody that you would play with again, trying to do more runs with the same group. There are a lot of groups I see where it's just kind of like the key ends, there's kind of like 30 seconds and then people start leaving. And like if anybody typed in party chat, anybody want to do another, you'd probably get to do another, but like everybody's just kind of too quiet. And the group just dissolves.
Yeah, that was crazy to me.
Again. Yeah, just
we've been telling people to add each other and like list your own key for years, and that's definitely the way to go. But like I did 4 or 5 pugs today, and not a single person added each other, even in the successful runs. And some of them were like really successful, and I was shocked that nobody added me. And maybe that's just like in the plus 20 to 24 bracket issue where I'm at the moment in the project. But there should really be more networking going on if people want to climb faster and more efficiently.
Yeah. So, well, your project, I mean, you kind of loosely alluded to it. Can you explain it a little bit more in depth for people who don't know what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, I mean, I just started like on a whim a project to pug anonymously to see if I can get the rank 1 title with only pickup groups, basically. And so I'm not playing with any friends or well-known players or experienced players that I could think of, and I'm only taking people that need the key for score for the most part, or like I've already only done that key at the current level I'm doing.
Oh God, now that's another level of like difficulty if you're picking up people who have never done that key on that level.
Yeah, it's actually eye-opening. I mean, I haven't done this for years. It's actually interesting to see how the community is going these days.
Another thing, so trying to talk about like getting people out of your guild. You don't even need to get 5 people. Even if you get like 1 other person or 2 other people, you're actually making your chances of succeeding in the dungeon like go up substantially just by having a couple of people in your group beforehand before you list the key.
One thing as well, so if you're new, you may be playing some suboptimal gear or talents. You may be playing a raid build when you should be really playing a Mythic Plus build and going for like an AoE set of talents. This is something that Public posted a reply to our tweet about. Sims are just one tool when determining builds for M+. You need to use them with logs or Raider IO or subcreation to really make the build you need for your comp. Too many people just follow their Sims like gospel. So this is very true. You can often identify like the raid players in M+ that are like playing like a raid covenant and a raid. For a lot of specs, especially this season, it's pretty similar. But in some previous seasons, it's like there's a completely different build you should be using in M+. And my favorite tool that's listed here for figuring that is the subcreation. So this is mplus.subcreation.net. If you go to this site and you click through onto your spec, you can see what talent builds people are running in high keys, what covenants they're running, legendaries, soulbinds, all this stuff. And you can just lift the most, like if there's something that is 98% use or whatever, you can just assume that is, until you are an expert, you should just be using the things that are that popular 100%. In the high keys. And then if you have later on, you can, once you have some comfort, you can try out the 37% things and see what the difference is and try and figure out when you'd use one versus the other. But it's a really good place to kind of jumpstart yourself.
And I think the big thing about raiders, especially going into Mythic Plus for the first time, is they play the raid build like Gratno said, but a lot of times they just will value the raid build because it's comfortable way too much and not swap to the AoE build. And they're like, oh, it's tyrannical, I'll just play the raid talents, right? And whereas they gain like 10% single target maybe in this scenario, they could have gained like 50% AoE dam by playing the AoE build and just done way more damage, which becomes apparent at the end of the key half the time to them as a raider. But that, and I'd say raiders typically don't use their CDs as often as they should, which I think we're going to talk about as well.
Yes, yeah, we can talk about that now, because kind of the general rule of cooldowns, at least offensive cooldowns, is that button lights up. Until you are an expert, you do not have a permit to leave your cooldown on cooldown. We will be handing out those permits once you reach 2,000 Mythic Plus score. You will get the permit that lets you not press your cooldown as soon as it's off cooldown. But until you get your permit, you will need to press your cooldowns on cooldown, or we will be, there will be penalties.
I mean, there are just so many situations where using it on CD, you're able to get like multiple. Okay, it really kind of depends on the class, but in almost all situations, you're able to get like multiple uses more if you're just using it on CD than holding it in specific situations. And especially with classes that have like pretty strong 1 minute CDs. So say you're playing like a Destro Warlock or Survival Hunter, because those are some of the more popular M+ specs this season. Destro Lock has Infernal every like it's like a 1.5 minute CD if you were like really AoEing a bunch and you're getting like a lot of shard gen. Like Resonating Arrow for Surf Hunter, you should basically never be holding that thing. That is a 1 minute CD, and you should be using that on cooldown.
Yeah, that thing's a 40-second CD if you're pressing it in AoE.
Exactly.
Yeah, that you need to be really sure before you don't press a short cooldown that like you really need it in like 10 seconds, right? Like, okay, if the pack is just dying, if there's one mob left in the pack, fine. Don't press Resonating Arrow, don't press Infernal, press it in 10 seconds when you start the next pull. But even if the pack is at like 30% health, just press your cooldown. Just press it again, and over time you may learn. Okay, you may be able to backfill, and you may be able to be like, okay, look, we pulled this boss with Lust, and I didn't have my cooldown here. Therefore, I'm not allowed to press this cooldown where I did, and I will need to hold it in that one spot. That is you're allowed to do that and learn that, and then hold your cooldown there. That is like you should have to have that experience. Once for each time in a dungeon where you will hold your cooldown.
Do not fall in. Sorry, what were you say?
I was just gonna say it's definitely better to overuse your cooldowns in bad spots than to not use them at all. 100%.
Do not fall into the trap where you also feel like one, you need your CDs for Lust, like right as Lust is pressed, and two, like you need it on pull for bosses. Because these are two traps that I feel like people fall into pretty frequently. Is that they feel like they either need it for the very beginning of Lust or they need it on pull of a boss. Like, I mean, you may as well like if the boss is at 80% HP and you're pressing your cooldowns, it's kind of the same. It doesn't really matter. There's some situations where it kind of matters, like if you're skipping phases and stuff, or like getting a second press on a boss and you're able to skip a phase. But like for people who are just initially learning, press it on CD. Really, really try to push the number of uses that you get first and foremost. And then if you're like, all right, that was a bad press, now you know for future reference, and you're like, okay, I don't press that there next time.
Yeah, and there are some, as you start getting into like upper Karazhan high keys, right? That starts to be the place where it's like, I really need to make sure I have it like on pull and then on 2 minutes on Curator and Medivh or something like that. Like, okay,
yeah,
that you will learn fairly. You'll learn that in that key in particular, a few key levels lower than it starts to matter in the other ones. But still, general rule of thumb should be offensive cooldowns get pressed on cooldown. Defensive cooldowns are a much more interesting point, I would say, because I actually tend to think pretty similarly here. Like, defensive cooldowns should also be pressed much more often than they are.
Actually,
by beginning players. Like, generally, like if you feel your health bar starting to move and you have a defensive button available, press it. Just press that button.
Same rule for defensive CDs go for offensive CDs. Like, just press them on cooldown almost, and if you find yourself in a situation where you needed your CD and you don't have it, then you can't use it on the prior pull or like 20 seconds earlier on the boss or whatever.
How do you feel that equates to defensive cooldowns that are on like a longer CD, such as Unending Resolve, Turtle, Ice Block, that kind of thing?
I think you should still press those nearly on cooldown, not like right on cooldown. Like Ice Block comes up, just sit in Ice Block, of course, but like you should find more uses for it if you're not pressing it nearly on cooldown. Same thing for tank. Like, I think new tanks have this problem quite a bit where they hold on to like Icebound Fortitude or Fort Brew for a long, long time without using it. And you should just get in the habit of using it and seeing how quick it comes back up, because it's usually a lot faster than you think.
How do you feel about the argument then of like, I didn't need it there?
I think that's just like, you might as well press it. It's free. It's off the GCD in most cases. As a tank player, especially if you start getting into those medium range keys of your goal before you hit those high keys, you should just start pressing your cooldowns, even though you don't need them, so you get used to the feeling.
Yeah,
this is terrible advice, but like I've seen some Moonkins logs. Obviously, this is like druids are the most class I'm the most familiar with, where they will go like a whole entire dungeon. They will only press Barkskin like 3 times. I'm like, dude, literally just bind that into your rotational abilities, and it's terrible advice, but it's better than not pressing it 3 times in a 35-minute window whenever it can have effectively 20% uptime. It's like, all right, dude, just bind that into your defensive, like bind that into your rotation. It's better than not pressing it, and that's kind of the level that we're talking about. Like, if you're not pressing it for 3 times in 35 minutes, you gotta change something.
Yeah, you gotta press it like 35 times.
Just next time you get a dot on yourself, press press bar skin, right? Like
Yeah.
it's it's free real estate. Yes, you don't have to do it to timing a lot of keys. A lot of times your healer's going to be able to keep you alive anyways, but these are the sorts of things where it's like, yeah, good players will be, experimenting using defensives in a lot of cases and like getting a lot of value from their defensives over the course of a dungeon.
This is going off that same concept, but even in raid, like during the farm periods, I find myself pressing defensives less than I should. And it's a good habit to just like force yourself to press a defensive, even though some dot is hitting you for like 5% because it's been nerfed 20 times on SLG. Like it's just a good habit of seeing something go onto you or like a cast coming at you and just pressing something.
So, you two as tanks, what do you guys do about like chaining pulls or like the end of pull and making sure that you have like good defensives coming into the next pull? Like what do you guys do to manage that kind of thing? Because I see some tanks, they want to save Dancing Rune Weapon for the beginning of next pull, but they were getting absolutely blasted at the end of one pull. Obviously, or like block for Warrior would be another example. Basically, there's infinite examples. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky. I mean, it depends on the tank. Like Dancing Rune Weapon is the biggest source of power for DK by a ton right now. So you gotta like really worry about Dancing Rune Weapon. So you can't use it sometimes at the end of pulls, and you just gotta save it. But if it's possible to chain into the next pull, then you can use it for sure because you can just keep using globals as you go into the next pull without any breaks.
So what is your advice for like newer players then? Like, what do they need to know? Obviously that comes with experience, right? Knowing that.
I would say for
like
Rune
that.
Weapon in particular, like make sure you have Rune Weapon on pull. That is a prio. Like anytime you're about to start a pull, make sure you have Rune Weapon for it. So yeah, especially when you're an undergeared DK, if your Rune Weapon is just coming off cooldown and there's like still 3 mobs left in the last pack, and you're not going to be able to like chain pull, don't press that Rune Weapon. Wait and press it as your first global of the next pull. Yeah.
Yeah, you start to learn those things. That's actually a really good tip. Like you start to learn to pull small things at the end of every pull as a tank. Like on DK, you got to pull some runic power for the next pull if you can help it without dying.
It's
you
not even just
Dancing Rune Weapon.
a tank thing as well. Like if you're a survival hunter and you got a bomb proc and you're sitting on a charge of bomb and 8 seconds until your second charge is up, and you're fighting like one mob and you're about to do a pack of 5 mobs, like you don't have to press that bomb. You can literally just start the next pull with 2 bombs and misdirect and bang. That's awesome.
Okay. So any thoughts on like healer externals?
That's a good one.
Yeah, so
I think you should just throw your healer external on the tank on CD just about like at the beginning of pulls is typically a perfect time. Even if it's a tank with Rune Weapon up. The same concept applies to like using your CDs early and often on DPS and tanks. Like you'll figure out situations where you should have held it as you go.
And then learning about things like aura mastery and stuff like that will also kind of come with time. You think it'll just be like kind of similar to the other defensive. Like you'll just pick it up as like, oh, these are the natural damage intake patterns of the fight.
I was just saying the same concept applies. Like using your healing CDs is just like using your defensives and offensive CDs. You get used to using them more over time. You develop good habits, and then you just learn to hold them when you need to. And it teaches you like how often you can use them, and like in some cases when you can chain CDs on certain bosses or certain packs where you would need. And then after you learn how to chain offensive CDs or defensive CDs, then you can apply that to any other situation where you'd have to do the same thing.
What about like drinking as a healer? I feel like it really kind of depends on the season. So at least in my experience with healers, and like I've played healer intermittently every so often. I just try to get like intermittent sips as often as I can. And if there's a boss that I think that I need like a full mana bar, then I'll just type in party chat that I need to drink. But more often than not, I just try to get like 2 or 3 ticks of mana, just enough to where I'm fine on that pack. You guys,
I feel like the healer doesn't have very much freedom and pugs.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just drink when you can.
Like if you are gonna need mana, a lot of pug tanks, it's gonna be very hard to get them to understand that, right? Like especially after last season's free mana and this season medium free mana. Yeah, you will have to put in party chat if you want actual time to drink, and then hope that you get listened to.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of communication, real quick, I want to talk a little bit about actually the like tank healer communication, which if you're playing either side of that, you do, I think, like you were saying about tank externals, Trell, like if you're just not communicating too much with your tank, just throwing them on the tank on pull is probably fine. even better, I would say, is as the tank, say, just throw Guardian Spirit on me whenever. Just throw it on pull if you want.
Hmm.
That's always fine. Or say like, do this for me whenever, but maybe save it on this boss or whatever if you're scared of it or something like that. And
Yeah.
similarly, as the healers at the start of the key, be like, I'm just gonna Guardian Spirit you on pull. Because sometimes, especially in the pugging world, there will be people who get weird about it. If you don't tell them in advance, they'll be like, I didn't need that. I was fine. You're just like, dude, I'm just pressing a good global on you, man.
Bro,
Yeah.
bro, GS if it doesn't proc has a 1 minute CD. Come on now.
Yeah, it's fine. It was for the healing increase, I swear. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there should never be shame on like pressing one of your good buttons on someone, like
yeah,
that mentality is kind of weird to me, but
it's a very weird mentality, but I still advocate playing defensively against it because like
yeah,
pugs getting weird is something that will happen pretty frequently, but you can make it less likely by letting them know in advance what you're gonna do.
for sure. And even in like coordinated groups, if I'm playing with a new healer that I haven't developed a lot of synergy with, I'll just tell them like, hey, just throw your external on me whenever you want. We'll figure it out as we go. Like if I need to have you hold it for someplace.
Well, I mean, same thing goes if like you need the external for DPS. Like that's something that you're gonna learn with time, or like need the external for yourself. That's something that you will also learn with time. I mean, GS is like a weird one. I mean, like normal externals such as like Iron Bark or Sack or something like that, you're gonna end up pressing it on the tank almost exclusively. Whereas GS, like there are times where GSing a DPS if they're doing something boneheaded is really nice.
Yeah.
True.
But yeah, I would say that like we're gonna talk about like UIs in a little bit, but tracking all of this stuff is like, especially as that tank healer duo, if you're on either end, making sure that you're tracking both ends of that is important.
Yeah, and developing a way to sustainably track stuff throughout each season is good too, because like at one point I set up my whole UI, in Legion, and I was like, okay, I'm tracking all the current externals and all the current CCs, and then the next patch, like 3 spells were added and 3 externals were taken away, or like the healer meta changed, So you got to have a way to like add in stuff that you want to track from season to season. So I use a weak aura right now with healer externals, and I just copy a weak aura and add in the new spell ID when something comes up, like fairies for Holy Priest as a healer external.
Oh yeah, an external by the way.
That thing is really
40%,
strong.
man. It's a
Yeah.
40% DR. It's insane.
Yeah.
Uh,
Some people don't even know that has defensive component at all.
All right, so if you're a new player, one thing we got a lot of tips about from our tweet was use your interrupt. But how do you use effects like your, I guess, interrupt, but also just like general stops, gouge, kidney shot, typhoon, all these sorts of different types of utility effects? Because obviously, like just pressing those on cooldown is can be potentially like if you're a Moonkin that is literally pressing Typhoon on cooldown, you're going to be very annoying. Which obviously you're a Moonkin, we already knew that about you, but even more so.
So this comes down to the class you play, and so we were talking earlier about picking meta classes and whatnot. But this is like now about your intimate one-on-one knowledge about the class you play and how it utility-wise it functions. This is actually one of the things that I see the most with like people who re-roll to a new class. They don't know anything about their utility buttons. And so like learning just like the situations in which your utility buttons are being pressed is actually kind of important. Troll, I have a question for you. How many times have you actually seen a hunter scare beast the bat on Zulgamux?
Oh,
Do you know that's possible?
Pretty much only the very experienced hunters, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean things like that, like there are very niche cases where some of your utility can be used, but I think that it comes with experience and understanding. Oh, what are the points that I'm going to need this? So like displacement effects, they can be used in 2 different ways. One, they can get distance from the pack to your tank, and so if your tank is like panicking and kind of like posturing like he wants to kite the pack, is a great time to use a displacement effect. The other time is to stop abilities casts or like get them grouped up. It kind of works in a similar way. I think Fish Stick is like a great example. Fish Stick can be displaced. Displacements on Fish Stick should be like a last call. Like you don't want to be knocking the pack, but like it can be really
good for it.
Yeah,
like,
but some displacements like you don't want to ring a piece to pack. Like let's be real, or a thunderstorm to pull for a Fish Stick. You don't really want to press that there, but you can.
Yeah, knocks can be annoying. I think that's one of the few things that could be annoying if you press them all the time. Like Shining Force and Thunderstorm or whatever sends mobs so far away. Typhoon is not that big of a knock. Ring of Peace isn't that big, but it's so good to test now and then.
Hunter's gonna have high explosive trap next patch, and let me tell you, or next expansion, let me tell you, that is a big knock.
Yeah, and then you got your single target stuns as well, your intimidations, your kidney shots, your asphyxiations, those kinds of effects that I would say with those, using that's actually something where I'd put it kind of like the offensive and defensive things of like get a lot of uses of that in each dungeon. Just try sending your stuns on stuff.
Monk has that leg sweep talent, right? Or the conduit?
They can, yeah.
Oh yeah, it makes things deal
The
less
DR
damage
out of
after.
the sweep, yeah.
That thing
Good.
is sick. Like, so for those who don't know what we're talking about, basically, if you CC a mob with leg sweep, it does less damage just to everybody outside of the sweep. And I mean, you can kind of just use sweep on CD, assuming that mobs aren't on stun DR. If they're on stun DR, I mean, you may not want to press leg sweep. There's still some situations where you want to press it. Ideally, your AoE stun you would like that to be your first stun in a chain, and then you want your single target stuns to be like the second and third stop in chains normally. There are obviously some situations where that's not the case, but
Yeah, leg sweep's a good example, especially with that conduit. Like that's something that you should probably press once a pull, once you get up to keys where pulls last that long, or just on CD if it's like a low key.
what's the deal with recasts and stops on specific abilities, Trell?
Yeah, so we've been mentioning like stops, right? Stops and knocks are ways to stop certain casts, and that's typically for things like fish stick is a good example where if you stop it in any shape or form, like if you stun the mob, it won't recast the ability; it'll go on cooldown. And so when we say use your stops on things like that, that's what we mean. A lot of spells will just recast if you stop them with a stun or a knock, and so they're not usually as worth to use those on, but it can still be a good use in some cases where you want to delay the damage they're going to do, or like chain a bunch of stops in a row to just make them never get the cast off before they die.
Or the word is anything bolt, and you just want your tank to stop taking damage.
Yeah, you're just you kind of bully the mobs for it, and sometimes you'll see this where it's like, oh, this mob is at 20%, right? It's like the dog next to Zolgamux that's doing flaming refuse cast, and it's just like, look, we're just gonna stun this, then we're gonna stun it again, then we're gonna stun it one more time, and it's gonna die before it ever gets that cast off again, because it'll keep re-spam casting out of the stun. But mostly, if it will recast out of the stun, don't worry too much in Pugs about stunning that. Try and learn some things that you can stun and it won't recast. And yeah, if there's not anything you can think of in the pool that does that, just stun something when it starts casting something. That'll be good.
Surely it's not gonna be that bad.
It's hard to go wrong with that. Yeah.
The best thing to do is just identify what the scariest casts are, and like have them in like a tier list in your mind. Like, oh, this is an S tier cast to stop. If someone has a way
my
of stopping
language.
it.
Yeah.
And over time, if you just try it on all those casts, like whatever class you're playing, you'll figure out what's generally good to do and what's not good to do.
I think Fish Stick is a really like if you're in Gambit and you're pugging and you make sure that no Scalebinder ever gets a Fish Stick cast off, you are going to make your pugs 3 minutes faster in that dungeon and like 5 deaths less. It's actually huge. So
there's also the Murlocs that cast the Enrage whenever they reach 50% HP. I'm trying to remember. The Fishmancer? Is it the Fishmancer? No, the Fishmancer's a caster, aren't they?
It's a Shell Crusher?
Yeah, I think
so.
I think Shell Crusher, yeah.
So the Shell Crusher does like an AoE Enrage at 50%
Cryo
HP.
McGurgle.
Yeah.
And similar to the stop phenomenon, you can just like AoE stun that, you can single target stun it, you can press any button on it and make it not cast that AoE Enrage. It's just really important. And that's like something that you learn with time and like experience. But if you don't know what you're doing and you're in this process of like you're really starting to dip your toes in, get your feet in the water a little bit with some of these dungeons, like slamming it on CD nobody's ever upset if you slam an AoE stun too early.
Yeah, I mean, again, I will apply there are some unreasonable pugs out there that will get mad at you for the dumbest things, but pretty rare.
I guess on like a more meta level, how do you learn how to do dungeons?
Oh, you just go play. Like you do exactly what we're talking about. You identify what the scariest things are in each pool as you go. You watch what others are doing, get their different POV on it, just like learning anything else in life. And then you go play it again and try something different maybe that time. Try one thing different in your route.
Yeah, I mean, your first dungeon, it's always going to be with 4 people that are more knowledgeable than you, right? So
yeah,
you're looking to learn from that. You're looking to, like, when you wipe to something, try and figure out what it was that you wiped to, and then try and see if there's something you could do to prevent that from happening again, right?
I also like to. It depends on like the dungeons and whatnot, but I really also like to like read the abilities in MDT and try to learn either the range or like the cast time on the abilities, like kind of what they do. Do they need to be stopped, interrupted?
Yeah,
And
that's
something that comes with time as well is like you learn how to apply like previous effects and like what mobs did in previous expansions, and you're like, oh, okay, I can apply this technique that I learned from that mob to this. Obviously, this is not exactly applicable to somebody who's brand new, but it's something that you do also pick up with time.
Yeah, I
the
call certain mobs Sarids from Metaldazar all the time. I call certain mobs Darkheart Thicket Cats all the time. They're just like the same kinds of mobs, right? You learn as you go and you kind of template things together to make them more simple.
that function in MDT is actually a pretty cool one if you're ever like bored and looking through, or you're like, what's that pack do again? If you open up MDT and then you right click on mobs, it'll open up like an ability list of the abilities they do. It's not like exhaustive. There's sometimes stuff that's not in there, but it's often a really good place to go to learn about what mobs do and which mob does what.
I think that ties into like post gameplay reflection as well. I think reflecting on whatever happened in your last 45 minutes of gameplay is really good. Like you can remind yourself, what were the top 3 pain points of this run? How could I make them better or do something better myself in this group content? And then also like watching yourself play, if you recorded at all, or if someone in your group streamed, you could watch their POV just to like better understand how it happened. Because we're human, we can't focus on 10,000 things at once.
We are starting to get into intermediate tips now. I think.
Yeah.
Sure, sorry, that was a little deep, but it applies.
I agree. I mean, you're not wrong, right? Like it's absolutely spot on.
I do think like when you wipe, trying to figure out why you wiped, like looking at death logs. If you have details, you can have a death pane open. If you have death note, you can look at like, okay, what actually caused our first death here, right? Like what is on this damage meter? And often it'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
this person got hit by 2 of these bolts, like 4 and 2 seconds before they died. Like, oh, maybe that's actually really important that we try and kick some of those here.
It's also difficult sometimes it's difficult to analyze by deaths just alone, like what went wrong.
Yeah.
I will say it's like, whose fault was this? Was it my fault that I didn't kick, or was it their fault that they didn't press a button?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, for the purposes of, like, fault, I think it's less useful, but more just, like, learning, like,
why?
This pack is dangerous. What are the things in this pack that are dangerous? Like, why have we died here? What combination of abilities are the ones that I need to look out for? And then you can learn, like, oh, it's this bolt that, you know, we should try and interrupt as many of these as we can. This AoE cast it went off and it did a lot of damage. And, like, if I'm being targeted by bolts, I should defensive. I should kick some bolts if I can see them. Maybe I can stun this mob off its cast, right? Doing any 2 of those 4 things will make it way easier to handle that pack next time.
There are also
Sure.
some specific times where they're like demo shout style effects that buff the mobs, or like maybe make
True.
you weaker as well, that went off 10 seconds earlier.
Even
and like
like-
it's difficult.
Yeah,
you're
fish
like, oh,
stick
God, I looked
healing.
at that.
Like you're looking when you look at a death log, it's never going to show fish stick there, but like this pack lasted for 3 minutes because 4 fish sticks got off.
And then my tank eventually died.
Yeah, like
Oh, yes.
obviously you're not going to get that from a death log, but I think a quick like a place that you can refer to the death logs will teach you some packs some of the reasons why you died, but it will not work for all packs, and it will not tell you all the reasons why you died ever. One thing we want to talk about, I guess, is the interrupt tracking CDs, tracking CC and interrupts, and getting an idea of who should go when on
Okay,
each
I guess
thing.
we can just layer this into UI as well, I think. And so we're starting to
Sure.
reach like the intermediate level, I think, with
Yeah.
some of the stuff.
Yeah, true. I mean, you don't have to track all this right away, but you definitely want to eventually.
Yeah, there are some kind of defaults, I would say, about interrupts in dungeons, which are you'll learn this from your first couple pulls with a pug, even if you don't talk, but like usually the tank is going to throw out kicks more aggressively than anybody. Like usually the tank is going to first kick something. That's a lot of tanks will do that. Demon hunters will often kick early again as well, because there's like a fury gain from that. Next expansion, there's going to be a bunch of other specs that will get a slight incentive to kick as well. It's going to be kind of interesting, and then like the rest of the melee kicks, and then there's like if there's people with like moonkins or long ranged kicks, those will be the people that kick at the last priority, except for the moonkin one, which is an AoE kick. But like
Which I'll kick whatever,
Yeah,
I need
that
to.
one has some special cases where like Moonkins will beam a lot of casters from AoE kick value, but
Yeah.
the ranged kicks in general will get used a little bit less aggressively usually.
Even just taking a step back, if we're talking about like add-ons that you're looking for, big wigs and little wigs, I would say, or DBM, both of those. I would say big wigs and little wigs are probably the best in regards to like what you're gonna get. That's like a general boss mod add-on, but it also little wigs is like the dungeon variation of that, and so it adds a lot of customization in regards to timers and like what you're going to expect from casts. It also you can emphasize specific trash abilities as well. If you notice something is becoming a problem, you can also emphasize that in big wigs and little wigs.
That requires you to go into settings for most, like there's a couple that it does by default, but usually those aren't like interruptible. Like fish stick, for instance. I think Little Wigs by default will put fish stick a timer on the nameplate of that mob for you, but you can get it to do more. You just have to go into the options itself and actually look through the casts to do that with. Yeah.
Yeah, and then weak auras I would say is like another add-on that's like almost mandatory. Whenever we talk about like tracking interrupts, there's one I use Zen Tracker. I don't know what you guys use for interrupt tracking, but I use like
as well.
Yeah, I just use a Zen Tracker weak aura, and I set it up for interrupts specifically.
Yeah, same.
That one, I mean that one's my preferred. It's just a weak aura, and then the third thing I would say is Omni CD, and that's like and it attaches cooldowns that are customizable to party frames, and those are probably the biggest three for dungeons in particular. Maybe you guys have other ones.
Another one I use is Exorcist raid tools, or I guess Method raid tools now.
Okay.
I never remember what it's called, but I have two columns I use as a tank player. One column from Exorcist raid tools is all healer externals, so no matter who I'm playing with, it'll just show up in that column, whatever they have available. And then the other column is AoE CC, so I just customized and added like every class's AoE CC ability to that column, so it just shows up when I have certain members of each class.
Okay. Mythic dungeon tools, we kind of alluded to it earlier. It's an add-on is what it is. And it shows routes, it shows the mobs in the dungeon, it shows how much count and percent they give, and it kind of gives you like a map of the dungeon. It's really good. Highly recommend downloading that too. Then beyond that, other weak auras, like we have a weak aura section in our Discord. There's a bunch of different stuff that we've put in there. I have like today I put in like a nameplate, like a AI learning nameplate cooldown thing that's actually super sick. In some situations, it can kind of clutter your screen on some bosses. Trall put an auto marker for mobs. Basically, what an auto marker does, it will generally mark high priority mobs in a pull that need interrupts. Is what it normally ends up being. Is it needs interrupts, that kind of thing. Jonas, do you have any opinions on Plater?
I like Plater. Plater's my nameplate add-on. You can also use KUI nameplates or LVUI default nameplates. Having nameplates is very good. Plater is nice because by default it will track a lot of stuff, but it's also a very customizable add-on. But you may not like it if you don't like add-ons that have 40 pages of options. You can, however, one of the nice things about Plater is you can import profiles to it, and you can, from the site wago.io, where you get weak auras, you can also get Plater profiles from there, and pick one, or you grab mine if you like it, the look of it, and it has one function I like about it as well. There's a module for it that does last names only, so instead of seeing Gromkar Foot Soldier, Gromkar Technician, and having your screen be cluttered by a lot of copies of the word Gromkar, it'll just say Technician Foot Soldier, and usually the last names are the important ones, and then you can go in and make exceptions for like whenever it's like Air Totem, Fire Totem, Water Totem, you want it to say Air, Fire, Water instead of Totem, Totem, Totem.
Cryptix, I know, has a really good player profile that a lot of the top NA players end up using. It for Mythic Plus, it ends up he like custom recolored every single specific mob, and it's like purple are mobs that need to be interrupted, blue are mobs that need to be stopped, red are just general mobs, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. And so he like custom colored those. I mean, you can obviously, you don't have to be that extreme with it, but having a UI and nameplates that work for you is very, very important.
I think it's worth noting for that, especially that's a DPS and healer specific, really good setup for nameplates. Like you want to see different colors for different types of mobs, but as a tank player, you probably shouldn't do that. You should have like one color for threat is good, one color for threat is almost bad, and then one color for threat is bad, it's about to kill somebody.
Yeah.
But that's actually a very worthwhile point. Like if you're wanting to set up a profile as a DPS player, definitely grab something like Cryptix Plater UI. And then if you're wanting to add something like the Kick Week or something like that, just go one step at a time. It's pretty overwhelming how much you can do with your UI. and just like look up the Zen Tracker Kick Week aura, and I think there's a guide on the actual page that it comes from.
Yeah, Zen Tracker, you can do like the things you're using Omni CD and Exhaust or Method Raid tools for. You could do this all with Zen Tracker as well. You could do that. It's like a very powerful weak aura that you can get multiple different like front ends for. But ultimately, like tracking interrupts on the group if you're somebody with an interrupt, or even if you're not, so that you can know when something is not getting interrupted as a healer. Like if you're playing a priest, seeing interrupts can still be good, although you may not want to clutter your screen with it. I could understand, especially if you're new. Tracking externals, you're tracking Dragon's Breath, Ring of Peace, Leg Sweep in this group, as well as Guardian Spirit, and then you're also tracking a little bit of offensive cooldowns as well, right? Combustion, Shadow Blades, right? These sorts of things that you just want to have. And I agree with Tettles, like add one element of this to your UI at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself too early on.
I also think that there are some specific things for healers that are going to be different than DPS and tanks specifically. You're going to need more mouse over macros and stuff like that to allow you to be able to heal while moving, healing while doing mechanics. I think Voodoo is also like pretty good party frames, in particular for healers, just generally.
Yeah, we've had some good healer episodes in the past with like a bunch of like just getting set up on mouse over of some kind, on some kind of way of healing that's not clicking on somebody's nameplate, clicking on your button that says heal, like cast heal on this person. There's a couple different ways. Like you can either do mouse over and then press a keybind to heal them, or you could do click on their frame to cast a heal on them. Both of those can be good different ways of doing this. Click with modifiers, those kinds of things. But those are almost always going to be better for you than clicking on somebody and then pressing your healing keybind. That's too many clicks to be doing.
One more thing to add to healers, I think like if you're looking at my UI screenshot that we were just looking at, I track only offensive CDs. This is a bad healer UI. This is definitely a tank UI. Like if I was a healer right now, I wouldn't track any of those offensive CDs. I track only defensive, so I wouldn't clutter my my screen. And I'd still probably track AoE CCs and externals and all that, but especially cooldowns, I'd only track defensives to start out.
It's important to like not only just track like the cooldown remaining on those CDs, but like the duration of which it's applied for as well after it's pressed. Because like I mean you can see Trell has Blazing Barrier. So like you see that Blazing Barrier is applied to that mage on his frame. But like we don't see the CD of it, but it's also important to track both ends of that. Like, well, when is it coming up, and when is it being pressed?
Yeah, even if you're like a prop pally, you want to track these if you're trying to start off healing your group. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's important to not clutter your UI too much.
True.
Like I see some people go way too overboard, and I've done this a few times in my WoW life where I've just put too much stuff in my UI, and I found myself not looking at half of it, and so I've really cut down. Like usually every other patch, I kind of cut down my UI as best I can.
Yeah, that's why I play without an interrupt tracker.
It is very true though. Yeah, like if there's information on your screen that you're not making use of, it's actually better to get rid of it and not have something that might, distract you. Some information that you need to sift through.
Setting up your UI is going to be a long, extensive process again, though. Like there are a couple add-ons that the add-ons that I listed at the beginning are the ones that you definitely really want. Beyond that, like general UI add-ons, you can kind of pick up what works for you.
And we've had some UI episodes in the past as well that you could go, and most of those still are mostly all accurate info. Obviously, UI is going to change quite a bit going into Dragonflight. That's like a UI overhaul expansion, so some of the required or useful add-ons may stop being as important.
I think weak auras are still mandatory.
Yeah,
I got bad news.
Weak auras are, of course, going to still be good, but you can probably get away without some of these things next expansion. Like without a mini map modifying weak aura, those kinds of things are
maybe
I'm sure going to be fine. But
go check out our Titanforge podcast Discord in the description too if you're watching this on YouTube or after the fact. And like there's like a weak auras channel. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
That resources weak auras channel is definitely the place to go for.
We've got some good stuff in there.
It's a good decision to make. I've taken actually not like 3 or 4 weak auras out of there. I'm just like, holy shit, wait, I want that.
Yeah, I took one today too.
There was one for the.
I was like, this is great.
The Streets of Wonder Market map that I don't know who linked it. I was like, I need
that.
I was like, I need that. That is mine.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay. Before we go on, I want to say that Tettles linked the what week order did you link today?
The I'm fired up AI nameplate cooldown week aura.
Oh yeah, that's probably a staple to have in your group on like 1 or 2 players, usually DPS players. That's good to have. You could use that as a tank player too. But then I also linked auto marker. Someone in the group for sure should use one of those. And then I
Only
also
one
linked
person. Only one person.
Yeah, true. Only one person, so they don't override each other. But then also I linked the targeted nameplate spells week aura, and that's also one of the staples that pretty much every group should have at all levels.
All right. We have a couple more small topics to talk about in our kind of more advanced part. The UI part was sort of in there too, but we got in there a little bit early.
Advanced, I think, is too
yeah.
Advanced even maybe a little bit of an aggressive term,
but like not for your first key. Or actually, honestly, some of this maybe you even still want to try and do for your first key. But first, we have our tip of the week segment, where I guess this show is kind of already tips, but this one is our free form. It could be about anything. So, my tip of the week is now is the time if you are interested in saving the Shadowlands, in getting yourself the Veil Strider title. Time is potentially running out to get this title. So this is a title not everybody knows about this one, but you get it for this achievement, Back from the Beyond. Back from the Beyond is a big meta achievement from content all over Shadowlands, but the good news for it is it's actually a lot of stuff that you might have done incidentally if you've been playing the game a lot. So for instance, you need all the rated, just clear Castle Nathria on any difficulty, clear Sanctum on any difficulty, clear Spellcraft on any difficulty, do hard mode Tazavesh, do all the Shadowlands dungeons on Mythic difficulty, right? These are all a lot of people already have all of these achievements. So get all the Covenant campaigns done, Renown 80 with all Covenants, unlock rank 3 of all Covenant upgrades. Shadowlands Dilettante is the hard one. But then other than that, there's just a couple of Torghast ones that will take you maybe a couple days and 10 Torghast runs or something to get through. Shadowlands Dilettante is actually the only hard part of this entire title to get a title that is going to go away presumably when Dragonflight comes out. And Shadowlands Dilettante, you're going to want to start now if you're going to look to get this before Dragonflight comes out. It's got a Kyrian one that you can do in one day. But then the other ones, you'll need to spend some time and hit some weekly lockouts to actually finish. You have to basically just do the whole Abomination Factory, make all the stuff for it. You have to get all the guests into your Ember Court, and you have to get exalted with the Mushroom person for the Night Fae. So you can do this. You can do this on the same character and just swap covenants multiple times per week, or you can do multiple characters and farm these all. Either way, it won't affect the time gate. The thing you want to get started on now is the Necrolords stuff. Get that started in the next couple weeks, and you can get yourself this
and the Ember
title.
Court.
Yeah, the Ember Court as well. Yeah, you want to.
Do you like the Ember Court, Trados?
It's very cool. It's very flavorful. Have a good time always in the Ember Court. So,
I've not done any of those things one time.
Dude,
these are peers, man.
These are cool, dude. It's a cool title. And yeah, it's
each their own.
If you look at that Back from the Beyond thing, you probably will realize oh, actually, this is 16 achievements, and I already have 11 of them. And all the ones I don't have, except for Shadowlands Dilettante, are kind of free. So, yeah, if you're interested, now is the time. Get started. Trell, what is your tip of the week?
So I've been asked a couple times how are DKs soloing Shared Suffering and the Great Push, and then super high keys and all that. So I figured I'd just break it down for people. But Shared Suffering is a pretty big, daunting thing for tanks going into lower care. I mean, actually, the whole dungeon is pretty daunting, to be honest. But this is one specific thing that I think a tip would be good on. So, DKs generally have Rune Weapon up for the entire fight on that boss. If you're geared well, you can pretty much do that. So you don't really press anything for the Mortal Strikes, which also hit you super hard. And typically, you'll parry them. But if you get hit, you can just Death Strike it off. But there's also usually one Mortal Strike debuff that goes into the Shared Suffering. So if you don't parry the one right before it, you're going to be in super danger.
Trell used the word Mortal Strike there. It's Mortal Strike because that's the icon. That thing is a 50% health reduction. That's not an actual Mortal Strike.
Right. It's called Mortal Strike, but it reduces your health, not your healing. So it's very bad for a one-shot Shared Suffering check.
That's why every tank basically ends up dying to that, because they're oh, I pressed Vamp Blood or Wall or whatever, right? And I end up dying. And they're how did I die? And it's just well, yeah, you had 50% HP. Of course you died.
Yeah, and Shared Suffering is a lot of damage.
And it's a very large magic hit it's supposed to be shared with 5 players, but it's kind of unreasonable to do it with 5 players in high keys because it's hard to get everyone to the melee, and there's like a horse charge going on at the same time. It's pretty rough.
It's unreasonable to do with any amount of players in a high key
Yeah.
in the tank. That is the tank's job.
But yeah,
But
the
you can
DK is how
limit
they're
as
doing
DK.
this.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah.
They're not pressing any of their 7 CDs on the mortal strikes. They're pulling everything for the shared suffering, and for the first shared suffering, it's typically like Vamp Blood, then you press AMS for a slightly bigger AMS, then you press Rune Tap, that's 20% on top of all that DR, and then you can press something else in addition, like IBF, Lichborn, a trinket, a healer external. There could be a bunch of things that fill that like 4th defensive slot in your order. And then you can also have someone soak with you and cut the damage in half. And then you should also be aware of, if you have the Mortal Strike debuff, if you didn't parry, then you should ask for an external no matter what, probably.
If you rapidly walk away from the shared suffering, it'll also recast.
Yeah, if it doesn't hit anybody, it will recast. So what we saw in the Great Push sometimes was like the mage would ice block, the DK would gateway away, and the shared suffering would hit the ice blocked mage and not hit anybody else, and then it wouldn't recast. That's really high coordination to set that up, but it's a good way to do it.
Super high coordination, but that's a really good way.
That's like if you're doing a 28 or something like that, yeah, you might want to look into that. But if you're doing
in lower keys, yeah, it's literally just like make sure you're pressing Rune Tap for all of them, and then just press half of your other defensives for each of them, and that will probably get you through it. But you do need to press a lot of defensives for that thing. And like you said, vamp before AMS, not the other way around.
Yeah, there's a lot of effects in the game that if you press a health increase first, it like makes your other abilities stronger. Like AMS is one of them because it bases off of your total max HP. Touch of Karma on Monk is another one. Touch of Death on Monk also is another one affected by max HP. All kinds of stuff.
All right, Tettles, we have a clip here. What are we looking for in your clip of the week from now?
Dude, this is actually the most broken thing ever. Charles, have you seen this?
Yeah, watch the whole video.
Here, really okay. Good. I think you could probably explain it a little bit better than me.
Yeah, so as he's doing the video, he pulls the boss and he puts these markers down of where the party stacks. Like on any of the missile barrage casts, that's where he wants the group to go, and he holds the boss as the tank slightly away from the markers, because I think the boss is the goblin's missile barrage cast is like a frontal toward the tank, is what he's explaining.
And there's something weird with like line of sight on those boxes. So look at where those markers are. Those are all the spots, and it's relative to where Rocket Spark jumps. So what he's explaining right now is like if Rocket Spark is jumping onto those orange markers, then you want to be on like the marker that's like
purple?
Nearest to it. Yeah, actually nearest to it.
Okay.
And then he's explaining that one that's in the middle right there is by far the hardest spot to line Rocket Spark, and then like they end up if you click through and watch the VOD, they end up pulling it. But if there are 5 locations where Rocket Spark can jump, and you can avoid most, if not all, of the missiles from hitting you, it is so good. That makes that boss way more reasonable.
If you haven't already, there is a video that he's got on his YouTube as well that's like actually goes through this and other Grimrail strats. So we'll put a link to that if you want to see. He's got like a YouTube video out going over basically Grimrail Depot hacks that they didn't get to show off in Great Push because it wasn't a Great Push Finals dungeon.
Yeah, there's some good stuff.
Okay, I did not know that's where that clip was from.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, we will link the YouTube video. I want to give them proper credit to where he wants that to go to. Yeah, we will link the YouTube video. That is sick.
This is now in Echo's Grimrail strat that they were going to do in the finals, but the map just didn't show up.
Yeah, which was unlucky for them. Unfortunately for them, it gave them the sad result of still winning without their best dungeon.
It's so unfortunate.
Yeah. All right, a couple other tips that we have. Routing. This is something where, especially if you're a tank in keys, you are going to be the person who's responsible for the route, unless you delegate that, which is usually pretty rare to do. I mean, you can do it as a tank. You can be like, does anybody have a route they like in here? But that will not instill confidence in your pug army. They want a tank that knows where they're going. And usually you can just hold on your W key and be fine in a pug. I would say this season in particular, the dungeon you're going to get in trouble with is Upper Karazhan, where you really want to make sure that everybody has an invis pot and uses it to skip the
last bridge,
Erudite Slayer and the the Pyromancer on that last bridge towards chess. That is, I would say that's the only skip I would bother making. Like, that's the only dungeon I would bother making sure that everybody in my group has an invis pot for if I was pugging as a tank. I don't know about you guys, though.
Oh, yeah. I did 2 upper carry pugs today. Both runs had an insane amount of trouble on that skip.
Yeah, so the problem with that skip is that Shroud, there's a infiltrator next to that Slayer. So you try and Shroud through. Most times you'll fail because somebody will trigger the infiltrator and it'll put everybody in combat and it'll be over. So invis pots are the way to go for that. It makes it much easier to get through.
Yeah.
You could, the same is true in Mechagon, that last pack. If you want to skip that, I would invis pot that rather than Shroud it as well, because there's also a infiltrator in there and you can't even distract with the inspiring mob in there this week. But that one is one where I wouldn't even bother skipping that necessarily if I was in a pug. If we had a warlock, I would try and get them to do the warlock gateway and skip it that way. But otherwise I would literally just pull that pack in a pug in most cases.
I'm keeping a stack with you guys. As a healer, DPS, or tank, I was about to say just healer DPS, you don't really need to use combat potions ever. You could honestly just, like, especially once you don't need this until you start getting like upwards of 25 using combat potions. You can just like save for invisibility potions perma. It doesn't really matter. Making sure that your invisibility potion up is important, especially whenever you're looking to try to do more skips.
Yeah,
that's true.
And communicating before with the group and being like, is there anything we want to skip in this dungeon? Especially as you are playing with the same people more.
Yes.
You're going to want to start adding skips in other dungeons. I do think the one skip you need to do, even in pugs, even in like 16s or whatever, is Upper Karazhan skip to chest. That is one where it's like, if your group is having any trouble with that dungeon, you are going to wipe to that stupid Pyromancer.
The Pyromancer is so cringe. Actually, one of the most cringe mobs ever.
But other than that,
there's actually just no option to pull that trash.
So like skipping the maiden hallway and lower, that's a good thing to skip.
You can play that trash.
But you can play it. It's fine. But I think the upper is on another level of like, this is something that you really want to skip.
Another rule of thumb for you, for just you as an individual, this is especially true if you're pugging. If it's not a score for you, you're also not legally obligated to use any consumables.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh man, you should use consumables.
Yeah, if it's
not legally obligated, of course.
If it's more than 50 score for you as well, you are required to augment rune. So make sure you stock up on those.
Okay, we're obviously trolling a little bit. So picking a route, like Drennis, I think that you're the one who's the most experienced with giving routes to people. Do you have like any advice for?
So mine are kind of
routes?
aimed for like Pug 15 type cases. So it includes a lot of like the goal is really to like if you download mine from Radar.io, you will be pulling the maiden hallway, but you'd be skipping the end of Upper Karazhan, because the idea is like, I'm not gonna make you invis-pot unless I absolutely think that you have to.
Right.
So the only time that I'm gonna make you invis-pot this season is Upper Karazhan at the end. I have 2 routes for Gambit, because Gambit is kind of close whether you skip the Guardians or not, and so I want one for skipping the Guardians and one where you don't. But other than that, it's like, for the most part, they're hold W strategies where it's like, what are the good pulls to grab, and it tries to be ones that shouldn't cause problems for newer tanks, and that's the goal, is to like, if you're a new tank and you download these, that you shouldn't be like doing any pulls that require the tank to like carry the group through, which once you start getting more familiar, you should start adding those pulls and carrying your group through them, and timing big keys as a result. But that's kind of the starting point that those ones aim for. And you should deviate as a tank as soon as you decide there's a pull you like or don't like. Just immediately change the route and do that, and bang, that's the process.
So just jumping back to like more beginner stuff, even if you're not a tank, downloading MDT and downloading Dratnos' routes and kind of looking at the mobs that he's pulling and kind of understanding why these are the mobs that are pulled, and also particularly looking at the mobs that are being skipped, if any, and understanding why those mobs are being skipped. Those are like pretty nice things that you can actually learn a decent bit about, like, what the meta kind of looks like in regards to routing. Why are these attendants and retainers in lower Kara off limits? That kind of thing.
Despite the fact that I have been accused of having attendance in my routes in that dungeon, there has never been an attendant marked in a Dratnos Lower Karazhan route. That is a banned mob that we do
Nor
not
should
fight.
there-
Attendants are banned.
Nor
Yeah.
should it ever be marked. Those mobs I think are some of the. Those mobs I think are the most off-limit mobs. Them and the Pyromancers are really bad.
Yeah, dude, actually, I liked it a lot better when that Pyromancer was Zul'Gamux in Upper. But now that Pyromancer is just a Pyromancer that you have to walk around, the first one
Well,
after curated.
I didn't because those witches are actual fiends, man.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
the
one
ghosts,
less Banshee
yeah.
you have to do now in
Yeah.
Upper.
Well, yeah, I go from 1 to 0 now.
Yeah, I do think like trying to get an idea. MDT has a cool feature now that if you're a nerd, you can start looking at called efficiency score, where if you look at a mob, it will give you a number that's like the ratio of how much count they give to how much health they have. And the better that score is, the more count you're getting per point of damage that you're doing to it. So that can be a cool way to evaluate the mobs. And then you can kind of, but mostly just like seeing like, do people pull these or are people scared of these? People in your pugs will give you some feedback on this as well. Like if you're a tank and you pull a mob, everybody will be like, no, don't do that or whatever. And you'll be like, oh, okay, this pug didn't like that. That's not conclusive evidence that the mob is bad to pull. Sometimes pugs have weird things, right? Like sometimes pugs just are completely wrong about whether a mob is ever, like just people just have preferences and assert them like they're facts.
I saw Echo pull spiders in Lower Kara in the Great Push. Should I do that in my
No.
melee stack pug?
Yeah, so there, and I would say lower is a place where actually there's a lot of cool stuff that, like, if you want to go through the kitchens, if you want to go through the usher area, like I feel like all that kind of is allowed, but
Spiders are banned, man. You cannot pull spiders if you have a single melee spec in the group.
If you're not Echo, the team.
yeah. So, but you know, if like multiple pugs are telling you like stop pulling this mob or whatever, then you know maybe think about not pulling that mob. Try and figure out why they don't want you to pull it.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? I would
That's an
unironically be down for like a triple usher route for like a high end group, but not just like a normal group, but like a high end group if they're looking to line of sight all the flashlights. Those mobs are pretty efficient count wise. Really obnoxious to pull though.
Yeah, I mean, ushers, you know, if you're pulling one or two at a time as well, even in low keys, they can be not bad. The thing about Lower Karazhan is if you're pulling ushers, that like, and you're just pulling in a straight line through the dungeon that way, you're actually going to go way over count unless you skip the maiden hallway. So if you are going to walk through and pull the ushers and the patrons there, point. You need to make sure that you're then going to invis pot or shroud and skip the maiden hallway. But that's a good route. You're not going to find that in a Dratnos route because I don't think it's worth to make the group have an invis pot in that dungeon, but it is something that I think is good if you are in a group that's willing to do that.
They're also very easy mobs that you can play that aren't ushers.
Yeah, ushers have been nerfed a lot, and they're still pretty annoying. But I think they've been nerfed to a point where it's like, if you want to fight ushers, I'm not gonna yell at you anymore.
Yeah,
I do think that Dratnos' routes are unironically a really, really good starting point for any group. Like if you're trying to step into Mythic Plus on any given role, then you should probably download some of his routes and just see what the meta is likely to be, like we talked about, and then start deviating slowly from there as you go up, or like if you play with a certain class, you know, like some build is likely better with a certain tank than others, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, the pull sizing is usually a little smaller than you're going to need if you're trying to like actually bring the key level up. There's a lot of good skips and good pulls that are not included in them as well, because like I'm worried about 15 key players having trouble in there. But yeah, like if you want to use this as a starting point, I will just say, like, as soon as you have an idea to deviate from the route, I am begging you to please do that. Please, any idea you have, try it.
I have a question. So if you're like a 15 level player or like a beginner, would you ever hop onto the beta and do like brand new Mythic Plus dungeons?
I mean, I wouldn't hop onto the beta at all unless I was a content creator and got a lot of money for doing it, because I think it's more fun to just play the game whenever stuff comes out on live. But
okay.
I think it depends on how serious you are. I think if you're like really serious about the game and you want to be super good in the next patch and like step into Mythic Plus and go for, you know, like the tournament level play, that's what JPC did right before Shadowlands came out, and he ended up being a really, really good player this whole expansion. He was like on the beta all day, every day, and I hadn't seen him do a single key on live before that ever.
No, he didn't start playing the game again until Crucible of Storms. Like, okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't think many people have that goal, but that's just like an extreme
Yeah.
example. Otherwise, I'd say just play on live.
Okay.
Play current content and see what people landed on for that season and how it went, and then apply those same ideas to the next season when you get there.
I will say if you have beta, it can be a good place to kind of like get an opportunity to play with people that wouldn't play with you on live. Because like if people are looking for DPS for beta keys, they're going to be a lot less selective than they are if they're looking for like DPS for 25s on live. So
Yeah, that's kind of true.
True.
It is an opportunity for sure, but also like I personally wouldn't do it because I don't like playing betas for fun. Like I wouldn't blame anybody else for not wanting to play beta, not wanting to set up your character and like deal with all of the pain of it.
I actually really like playing betas, but I don't know if I'd recommend it to people.
Yeah. So I mean, there's no right answer for that. That's preference.
Yeah.
All right, last tip that we want to get to in this episode, and again, we've only scratched the surface here. We might do one that I would say we called some of these advanced, but this was more like beginner, intermediate, not like technical tips necessarily. But we may do more of this. We might do some role-specific ones. Let us know how this episode landed for you and all that stuff, and we will try and adapt accordingly going forward. But the last one we want to touch on we've touched on a little bit earlier was Charlie, you were talking about like thinking back to how you play, but VOD review in particular is one that a lot of streamers will tell you is like a really good tool. And I do think there is a lot to be said for this of like watching back your gameplay and seeing if you can identify mistakes. The problem is if you try to do this on your first key, you're going to have no idea what to look for. So it is something where you do need to kind of equip yourself with the tools to know what you're looking for in your VODs. I would say look for like, again, anytime where you died or wiped, you're going to want to look back and like watch how that happened, see if you can do a wipe scene investigation. Look at your offensive cooldown timers and see if they come up and you don't press them and try and figure out why, or if that was just you being dumb and then, be in your head like, I was dumb, I should have pressed my cooldown. Those are the main things I think that you can get out of your VOD review, and also just like obviously rotational errors if you can see them.
I do agree that there takes some like kind of self-awareness, I guess, that just kind of is built up after playing the game for a while, where you understand like what mistakes are being made, either on like a micro level, like individually, like cast sequence issues, cooldown issues, that kind of thing, or on a macro level, like wipe investigation. I think that it takes some level of self-awareness that is just built up over time.
And then on top of that, you should if you're trying to learn something that you're especially just starting out on, you should watch someone else's VOD and how they do it, and then compare yourself like way later to what you originally learned from them. Like I think Growl said a long time ago on our show that he watched Zamok play HPAL on like 0.25 speed, and that's how he learned HPAL. Like he just watched a really good player do it at a fourth of the speed of normal time, and he just like copied the rotation, especially the opener.
Yeah, you do have to be careful because sometimes even good players that you might watch you want to be careful to make sure that you're not like internalizing their mistakes as well. Sometimes even really good players will have like something they do wrong consistently. But usually if you see a really good player do the same thing over and over again, it's usually a good place to get started on. But yeah, obviously like it might lead you astray.
I mean, I think even experienced players don't do this enough. Even if you're the top of your class, you should watch someone else play your class that's also pretty good. They might just have some slightly different ideas from you, and you can combine both your own ideas and their ideas to make something even better.
Oh, I mean, that's especially true for like routing. Once you start to get to higher levels, you just rip other people's routes, or you're like, oh wait, they did this differently, and they timed this key that's higher than mine. I'm taking this.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's again a lot to be said for just like trying every different variation that anybody else is doing, because even if you think it's worse, just try it and see what it's like, right?
Well, I think that this is also like really important in regards to like positioning and like how you position around the room, where bosses are being tanked, where you as like a ranged player, a melee player, or whatever are also positioning.
Yeah,
it's all about exploring the unknown, right? You got to always think like there's probably something out there that I could do better, even though I can't think of it right now.
So yeah, I think a lot of our tips kind of boil down to that same place of experiment with stuff, try using your abilities, anything that's part of your kit, try sending it more often, find people to play with. Ideally you want to try and find people to play with that aren't going to be too judgmental, people that you can be bad in front of and make mistakes in front of, and that will at best help you correct them and like help identify them, but at least not like flame you or anything like that for it. Ideally, is the idea when you're getting started. But
Ask questions. Ask questions.
yeah, if again, you may or may not be in a group that has people that can give you good answers for this, but as you're getting started, everybody's gonna know something you don't. So try and learn some of that stuff from them. All right. We've got a couple of Q&A questions to get to. First, however, we have some Patreon supporters of the podcast to thank, as I see Tettles frantically changing the Patreon nicknames.
All right, we're done.
I
got them all fixed. We're
until
good.
now. They are
We're done.
Paul, Titanforge podcast, more like Tanks Are Forged Here podcast. Haven't played WoW since week 2 of season 4. Am I finally free? Also L. Haven't played since week 2 of season 4, so for a month. I feel like you need to have not played WoW for like 10 or 15 years before you can even be relatively confident that you might be free, but I'm not sure.
Unless your name is Preach, in which that case once you quit, you're not allowed back.
Right, of course. That was instant. Had never made any WoW content ever since then, of course.
Well, actually, he's actually not allowed to make any more WoW content ever again.
I see, yeah. Never Nude, Ja, Dratnos' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Chewy. 2050 is closer to us than 1990. Now don't cry.
Okay. Boomer. All right, man.
Well, I never saw the year 1990. I will see the year 2050 probably.
ZivXX, Salty Senny, Necris, Sonora, Tankdill, Nevuk, Eevee Survival Main, No Trick, I Forgot I Was Subbed Here, Dymat, Lufer, Rework Mistweaver. According to the new social contract, Sires and Athreys is supposed to ask us if we consent to being choked before that mechanic happens. Nyx, reminder that every time Darth Vader force choked someone, he did so as a daddy. Dude, what are some of
these names?
What are you guys doing to us?
Why did I change
This is a
these
PG
names?
podcast.
Yeah.
What happened to our patrons?
PG professional gamers.
Gallic, Brusif, Dratnos Abyss. I'm ready to void shift my tank. Pepe Laugh Tea Time. Msanity, Xena. Rogue is now good enough for Prague, still bad enough to be sat for SLG. Bless up. Red Color, youtube.com/workbringer. Alphabet Soup. Druid Friends of Evolved Gaming. Number 1 Simsky for Trelsky. Lurka wants to remind the world that it's not my fault. That was bad.
That is Scottish.
That was,
we have the same.
Why do you, well, it's spelled mah, M-A-H. Like how do Australians say muh? Well, that would be M-U-H. Muh. It's not my
Please keep
fault.
making Dratnos say that every week.
I need an Australian. Can any Australian send me an MP3 of you saying it's not my fault? Thank you.
You sound like a Scottish person even still.
Milk. Pwn. Windwalker Mugs deal with nerfs by rolling with the punches. Due to Sims with 4P, Skelly will be going back to Elemental from Enhance. PI no longer for sale. I have a Shadow Fiend to juice. The Marsh Hare, and please keep Kyrian Arcade and Dragonflight.
Wait, is that person saying they're PI'ing their Shadow Fiend?
Yeah, hang on. Wouldn't they just PI themselves anyway?
I think it's themselves, right?
Maybe it's PIing their Shadow Fiend with the Twins legendary. Could be a vibe. Could be a vibe.
Can you PI my Ox, my Brewmaster Ox, please?
You
All
PI
right.
my Tyrant?
Our first question comes from Not Half Bad on Twitter, who says, is there a barrier of entry for 20s? I get Keystone Master every season and time some 17s. For some reason, a little intimidated by 20s. I would say this season, not... there. I don't think that many abilities go from, like, one-shotting you to not one-shotting you between 17 and 20. The main thing is, like, bosses are going to live long enough that you're going to see some extra mechanics on them. I feel like the one-shot line is like 23, 24, 25 is where medium amounts of abilities start to one-shot, but I'm not sure.
Well, we're Mythic Raiders, right? This is really
Yeah,
hard
I mean,
for
it does
us
depend on
to
your gear,
analyze.
obviously, but gear's only going to shift this level by 1 or 2 levels.
I think a lot of people get this problem with ladders and like key ranges where they don't quite get to the 15 level, or they don't quite get to the 20 level, or they don't get past like 24 plus for certain reasons. I think a lot of the time, and not all the time, but a lot of the time, it's just like a sense of you don't think you're going to be able to time it at that level for whatever reason based on the people you've been playing with or your own skill level. But when you get to that level, everyone's going to be a little bit better than before. and you're probably going to get better yourself too. So like you shouldn't be too afraid of it. You just got to get yourself in there and go. Like I think earlier when Tettles was talking about doing 15s and getting raiders that do their weeklies, I think doing a 14 is harder than doing a 15 for that reason. Like once you actually get to that 15 threshold, it's easier to find groups. And I think the same thing is true with 20s versus 17s.
I think it's one of those things that you just kind of have to put yourself out there, right? You don't know if you can do it until you try.
I will say, like, the bar of 20s this season, like 20s this season and 17s last season are pretty comparable difficulty as well, right? Like the key level, there's been key level inflation, inflation. So you like, if you were doing 17s last season, you can do 20s this season once you get to the same relative gear that you had last season. I believe pretty strongly. So, yeah, I think like you said though, like the getting into the groups that do 20s pretty easily is kind of the hard part there often, right?
Easily is the hard part there. I mean, there are actually a lot of LFG groups right now. I've been pugging a considerable amount on my Warlock. There are a lot of groups that are even doing like 25s and stuff like that. But I think that there are even more groups that are pugging 20s, and you can get into groups. It just takes it's a lot of gumption.
It takes a little grinding for sure to get there, but then all of a sudden you'll feel like it's easier once you're there, and then
I think that
keep going up.
I think that like if you're doing 15s, you're not making any mistakes. You're doing 17s, you're actually having pretty good success. You may as well just slam it, and you might surprise yourself.
Next question comes from Frost in Discord, who says, do you think Blizzard has to make more infrastructure to connecting the M+ player base? Raiding has guilds, but there's no such thing as an M+ guild. Most of this is done via Discord servers, but it's not official on Blizzard's end, and many players aren't on these servers.
It's hard to say what they could even do about that. I think it's mostly community based. Like I'm trying to think of like in games like Dota, I don't think they had anything like that either. Trying to get yourself into communities.
I mean, they do have like literally the communities feature that came out recently.
That's bad.
Yeah, but like, what more are they supposed to do to?
I mean, it's just not where you want to be, is what I'm saying.
Right. Like, what are they supposed to do to make something similar to like what guilds have for raiding?
I may be of the unpopular opinion that guilds only exist right now because Mythic raiding requires you to be in a guild still.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mythic raid, like a Mythic raid team would probably be a pretty similar thing without, right? Like the guilds versus like a fixed Mythic raid team, like that would probably persist, right?
I don't even know if the guild matters though for a lot of guilds.
Yeah,
like they're in a Discord together too.
Right, exactly. Like I mean, now we've got half of our members are Alliance and a guild called Popsicle Cornbread, and they're
Vesper Alliance,
right?
And one other person.
So the in-game guild thing is actually not being used anymore because there's no cross-faction guilds. Like we don't have everybody in there. Even it is just like a guild by Discord. But like, how do you make something like that for M+? I don't know. I mean because the M+ unit is 5 people. It's not 20, right? You don't need as much coordination. It's like there are Discord servers with 5 people who do M+ with each other, but like would a Discord server of 30 people who all did M+ with each other, that's not really comparable to that would be more comparable to a raiding guild of 100 people that formed 20s kind of amorphously out of that 100, and that's not something that happens.
So somebody in chat says that they use the recruiting Discord to find teammates for Mythic+. What is your success like with that? I'm actually really interested to hear what, like, do you find that you're able to get teammates for Mythic+ fairly regularly out of there? Or is it just for like a one key thing, or is it end up being a little bit more long term? Because I think that's actually really interesting.
I do think that there are some good Discord servers to be in for Mythic+. You know, anytime you're doing keys, just getting invited to servers, you'll eventually start getting invited to ones where people run keys. You can get in on those.
That's how it works for me. It's just like I'm in friend groups, and then like they start running keys, and I get invited to do keys with them. Right? That's like how it goes.
Yeah, you start getting invited to servers that it's just like
so. I guess the answer for me is no. I don't think that Blizzard needs to do anything specifically. I think that players need to be more adaptable to their situations. I don't know. I just don't think that Blizzard can do anything. Like I don't think that Blizzard is able to.
Yeah, I don't think they can, to be honest.
Because they have communities and people don't use them.
Yeah, and there are some communities that do M+, but usually those are at a much more casual level, right?
Or
Yeah.
they'll
Sometimes they're
break.
temporary. Like there'll be like a couple big discords every so often that people run a lot of keys in. There'll be some community that someone like has a pet project of running for key gamers, but then like eventually they usually fall out of touch, and you have to move on to other communities.
All right, our last question comes from Boba Wet, who asks, "How do you keep your cool when people make the same mistakes?" Yeah, there's one person I get very mad at when they make the same mistake over and over again, and that's me. But anybody else, I don't
True.
really care. Like,
I thought you were going to say Tuttle's, not going to lie.
well,
Well, we don't key. We don't key together.
for very good reason. We're contractually obligated to never set foot. It's like how you can't have the president and the vice president in the same place at the same time. It's the same sort of rule there. But no, it's like if you are, at least so the way I philosophically look at this is like there's not people that I will be mad at if they're bad. Like if they're making a lot of mistakes, if they're bad or whatever, like okay, I will just if playing with them is not going to work for my goals, I won't play with them, right? But like I'm not going to like yell at them or lose my cool because that's not my place to be.
This is always a hard question to answer because it really depends on the situation, the person, the relationship you have with the person.
Yeah.
Like if it's the same person literally making the same mistake over and over and over and you're not okay with it, then eventually you just got to stop playing with them or just set a reasonable expectation to only do certain content with them, something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, the issue here is either your expectations and their expectations don't line up with one another, because otherwise they would fix the problem. Whether it be like they play better or they're more attentive whenever it's happening or something, right? Because otherwise this would not continue to happen. So I mean, it depends. Obviously, it depends on the relationship with the person, but like Charles said, you either change your expectations and get over it, or you stop playing with them. And both, I think, are fine. But I think that like just letting yourself get upset over it is not healthy for you, and it's probably not helping them.
I should say though that first, before I do either of those things, I usually try to do it a fix on the problem in some constructive way, regardless of like how much I know the person. If I don't know them at all, if they're like a pug, I don't even try. Like,
oh yeah, no, if
they're gonna make the same mistake, I don't know them, they're not gonna take my advice, right?
Yeah,
But
I mean, if they
like,
seem nice, I like if somebody's like asking for help or advice or seems new, I'm. But even then, I won't. It wouldn't be like you should interrupt this. It's like, hey, you can actually use interrupt on that or whatever. Like just some kind of nudge like that. But that's a different thing than like if it's somebody that you've been playing a couple keys with and they just like can't seem to get this thing right, and you kind of realize yeah. I mean, I think being like you gotta stun that, right? Something like saying something like that so that you don't just like stop playing with them out of the blue. But ultimately, like if they keep, if you let them know the problem, you let them know the thing they got to do, and they don't do it, getting mad is a much more toxic thing than just not queuing with them again. Like, I mean, there's some groups where it's just like, I don't know, the yelling. Some people actually can kind of thrive in that environment, but I'm certainly not one of them. So
Europeans.
I do not
yeah,
know
the
how people
Euros
thrive in
do
that
sometimes. There are some Euro groups where they're actually just like at each other's throats the whole time, and that works for you. If everybody's okay with it, then sure. But that's not the kind of group that I would want to be in. So I don't know. Ideally, you want to be only playing with people that don't make the same mistakes over and over again once told about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it can be really hard. Like, social dynamics are the hard part of the game, especially because most of those of us who play World of Warcraft have weaker social skills than the population average. So throwing us all in a 5-person group together sometimes creates extra tensions. So, do your best. I don't know. But yeah, I would say the main mindset shift is just their play is not your responsibility, right? Like how good somebody else is not. At the end of the day, that's something that you can try and help with, but that's not something that you have control over. So don't feel obligated to try to beyond a reasonable amount.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. I think that's it for our questions. And that is it for our show. Again, we're looking for feedback on how these tips landed for you. If you felt like they were if they were too beginner, too advanced, if you thought there was some good stuff, but then you thought we went off the rails on a certain part of it or whatever, all that kind of stuff, we are interested in hearing how that went so that we can figure out what sorts of episodes in this space to make in the future. And again, links in the description to the Raider.io Learn tab place that you can find, the now Grimrail Depot video, our Discord where you can get a bunch of good weakors in that weakors resources tab, and also if you just ask people questions about M+ in that Discord, almost always you will get a pretty good answer pretty quick now. So a pretty good Discord to be in if you are a beginner M+er as well. Yeah. But that's going to be it for us this week. GN gamers.
Later.
GN. Or GM.
Or GE.
Or GD, as the Australians would say.
GDM.
GD, M.
GDI.